All right, welcome to the Casey Catch Up. I'm super stoked to have Fiona Wylde on. Fiona and I go kind of way back. Probably, I reckon about 10 years we've known each other, and it's been through different sports, I guess. And anyway, I'm excited to get on here. I want to know more about Fiona. I want to know everyone else to know more about Fiona, and I guess her journey to, a runner-up finish in M2O this year. On the foil, which is I'm super excited about. So Fiona, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fun that, a friendship in sport can span so many different years in sports and whatnot. So I've always appreciated traveling and racing with you. So thanks so much for having me on here.
Yeah, no, stoked. And this is a downwind foil podcast, pretty much specifically for it. And the reason Fiona's making an appearance this time is because she's dipping her toe into downwind foiling, and I'm hoping she jumps all the way in. So this is me trying to encourage her to do a little bit more. But before we get into that, I want to go into a bit of background on you, Fiona, and just educate the listeners and viewers on how you got into what led up to downwind foiling M2O in 2024, and start from as early as you want.
So how much time do we have?
Yeah, I was going to say 5 minutes or less.
I'll keep it short. Yeah, I'll keep it short. But no, thanks. I mean, for me, water sports is pretty cool because I grew up in a family where windsurfing was our family sport. And one thing that I think is kind of fun is my mom was the one who actually taught my dad how to windsurf. And then together they both taught me how to windsurf. And so growing up, windsurfing was the thing that we did. That's what I went and did after school. And it was our time as a family to go to the beach and, share a passion, share something together. And for my parents, they thought it was so cool that I, liked to windsurf because we could go and do something together. They certainly weren't pushing me in any direction for competition. My dad ended up doing a couple little races. My mom, she's actually one of the best windsurfers I've ever met. She just has this style and speed and grace on the water. It's really cool. She's not out competing or anything like that, but she's just a beautiful sailor. And so, there wasn't like, hey, you need to go and race now as a young kid. It was kind of from me. I was like, hey, I want to try and do that. Like I see other people going around, races. I want to try and do that. And so I convinced the race director when I was 10 that I could go out and do a windsurf race. And they were kind of like, oh, I don't know. She's pretty small. You can't really jibe. I was like, just let me try. So anyways, I went and tried and I finished the race. And so I did one race when I was 10. And then I was like, okay, when I'm 11, then I'm going to start and do the whole series. It was like a local summer series here in Hood River. Anyways, I did the summer series and I just had so much fun with it. I liked the structure that racing gave you because I could always try new things. I could learn new things. And that's, I think, when I kind of got exposed to like a little bit of competition. I was young, super young. And I had no idea at the time. I just thought, it was super fun. I wanted to keep going with it. But windsurfing has kind of been this, sport that's always carried through all the sports that followed. I learned how to windsurf wave sail, growing up in Hood River, Oregon, and then also in Los Barriles in Mexico. I live in two places where there aren't waves, but there's wind. So this novelty of like learning to wave sail was something that was extremely appealing. And so it was pretty fun. I got an opportunity to go to a place in Mexico and learn how to wave sail when I was young. I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing. And it's combining waves and wind and all that. So wave sailing introduced me to windsurf wave sailing introduced me to waves and to surfing. And I started competing in little windsurf wave sailing competitions on what was called the American Windsurfing Tour. And when there was no wind, a lot of times there was still waves. So I used that as an opportunity to learn how to stand-up paddle surf. And so that you can kind of see this, like one sport kind of led me into the direction of another sport, which is a really cool way to like kind of continue to tiptoe into like seeing what is possible within a sport, within the water sports world and whatnot. stand-up paddle racing came along, thanks to Steve Gates, who from Hood River, Oregon, when he started the Big Winds Jet team. And I was 14 at the time. He taught myself and 4 other kids how to stand-up paddle race. And, that sport really clicked for me because it was, combining athleticism, it was combining strength, still learning how to read the water, all of these different elements from windsurfing that I had learned, from stand-up surfing that I had learned, all these little things that just it was such a fun challenge. So I loved stand-up paddling. And I had a lot of success both in windsurfing and stand-up paddling and, racing and surfing. I ended up with a junior world title in windsurfing from the PWA, and then 3 world titles in stand-up paddling from, both technical and distance races. I'd never won a world title, or haven't, in stand-up surfing, but I was second quite a few times. But, lots of different experiences. So when this thing called foiling came around, it was kind of like, well, how does this fit into the equation? Where does this go? And my dad, he actually was a person who was like, I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to figure this thing out. And I would be stand-up paddle downwinding, and my dad would be like, I'm going to learn how to do this thing on a foil. And sometimes I would go, and this was 2017. So I'm still training, stand-up paddle racing, all that stuff. We would go to Viento in Hood River, and my dad took this board and he kind of chopped off the back, and it was an old surfboard. He chopped off the back and got this beginner, as early on. So I think it was a GoFoil, and stuck the GoFoil in the bottom with the tuttle box. And I would go downwinding on my race board, and my dad would try and come, stand up foiling. And at the beginning I would be in there and I'd be waiting for a while because it was super hard to get up on foil. It's hard to get up on foil today, not to mention, 6 or 7 years ago with this massive thing. Anyway, so I was like, okay, fine, Dad. You're doing this. I have to try this. And that for me kind of was the beginning of foiling. I'd foiled with windsurf before, but I had never stand-up foiled. So I took one of my starboard surfboards and once again put a tuttle box in it, and took my dad's old GoFoil, stuck the tuttle box in there, and then went and did a Viento run. And that was the beginning of stand-up foiling for me. And I was like, well, this is cool. Nobody was doing it. People thought we were kind of insane. And so I was kind of like, well, this is just my fun outlet. And what's cool is until this year, 2024, it's always still been my fun outlet. I hadn't, thought of necessarily going and racing and all that. It's just my surfy, cruisy outlet because, there's been so much competition with the other sides of the sports.
Yeah.
So, but what's fun is I think that some of the racing, no matter how hard you're racing, you're still incorporating that surfy, fun, cruisy side.
And that's,
anyways, that's a really long version of one sport leading to another and being like, oh, but what if you do it like this? Or what if you add it in? And I think that a lot of times people get super single-minded in one sport and only training one thing and one discipline. But it's if you do all these different things, eventually you're going to find yourself at a buoy turn and notice that the swell is running this way and the wind's coming from this way. And you've been in that situation before in perhaps a different sport, and you can plug and play that. And then you come around the buoy first. I don't know. That's my experience anyways.
Absolutely. Definitely. For me, very similar, I won't go through myself, but the similar, we've kind of sort of traveled a similar sort of trajectory, I guess. And I've sort of dove in some bits where you sort of didn't. And I guess, how is your downwind foiling? Just sounds like you pretty much learned to foil without a sail, windsurf or wing, just with a paddle doing downwind runs. And that's something that I feel like not many people do these days. They're either winging, and then they might go into surf foiling, and then downwind foil's kind of the top of the pyramid, so to speak. It's the hardest to learn. Just to everyone listening, Fiona's a freak, so this isn't the same for everyone. But how many goes did it take you to downwind foil? And how long was your Viento run? The first couple?
Oh, that's a great question. I had foiled before on a windsurfer. So I'd windsurf foiled before. So
Yeah.
that was my kind of first experience there. I think the first Viento run probably took me like 2 hours or 2.5 hours, which, it's a 7 mile run.
Everyone would love to hear that.
Yes, absolutely. And, I probably paddled it like on the water halfway through until I got like at least past Mitchell Point, and then started to get up onto foil. So, it took me a while to get up on foil.
People want to hear that. People want people to struggle. We all struggled, and I'm like,
that was a struggle.
Yeah, it was a struggle, but like compared to others, they just paddle the whole thing. So that's what I said.
I think
that is a freak.
I think one of the big things that helped me in terms of like learning the sport is, and I think a lot of people forget, but I paddled professionally. Like that has been, that's where I've spent the majority of my last 10 years training every single day, breaking a stroke technique down to get the most efficient paddle power going forward from my body. And, I think that's very underestimated in terms of like learning how to stand up foil. Because at the end of the day, that's how you're going to get up on foil. So, for me, it's like, okay, I needed to figure out a bit more of like the pumping and what it actually feels like when you're flying. But the paddling itself, I was like, okay, I know how to do one part of the equation. And to be honest, that would be my biggest advice to people who are learning is like improve your paddle technique, and your paddle stroke to be able to get more efficient when you're trying to get up on foil.
Yeah. So are you telling me it took you half a Viento run to learn to downwind foil? Is that the answer?
No. I feel like that's a bad claim. No, I mean, it was like I would pop up on foil for a second and then like do the wobbly wobbly splat, and so it would take a while. But I do remember when I came over to Swell City, I actually caught a glide and was able to like go for more than a couple seconds, and I was like, okay, Dad, you're onto something. This is kind of fun.
Yeah. Okay. So 3/4 of a run.
Yeah. But I will fully admit, like when I was, learning, you're still learning. Like sometimes you go out there and just for whatever reason you can't pop up on foil. Like some days are easier than others. It is probably the most frustrating sport I have tried. So just throwing that out there as well. Like I want people to know there's like, just because I have a big background of doing stuff on the water, it doesn't, alleviate you from the frustration moments.
Yes. No, it's a humbling sport, but I guess like you've felt and said, like once you're up, it's like, okay, Dad, you're onto something. It's got this certain draw to it that not all sports have. So
unbelievable. I mean, you get up on foil and there is nothing around you, and it's up to you to not only read the bumps to stay up on foil, but there's a physical element of how to pump. And I think one of the coolest things is just the view that you get when you pop up on foil, because you're not obstructed by a sail or a wing or a kite. It's like it's purely you, and that's a very unique experience to have. And especially, you haven't necessarily started by having the power of a wave, per se, pushing you in. Like it's very much you that makes it happen.
Definitely. And I think, Hood River, was Hood River the only place you downwind foiled for a long time, or did you get down to Mexico as well and do some runs there?
Yeah, we did some runs both in Hood River and in Baja, which is very cool. Like in Baja, where I live on the inside of the Sea of Cortez. And so we have this spot, if we drive up the coast, it's called Punta Pescadero. And then from there, it kind of sticks out a little bit further. So you kind of like stick out a little bit more into the sea. And so you have this like nice downwind run that comes in. It's about 10K. And so it goes pretty quick, but the bumps can be unbelievable. So at the beginning, pretty much was just staying, like in Hood River. And then as equipment progressed a bit more, then we started taking more foils down to Baja as well. and yeah, the last few years that we've been downwinding a bunch there, and of course wing foiling too.
Nice. Awesome. What's the difference? I'm always curious as to like how different locations are different conditions, and Hood River is kind of, look, it's a mecca for wind sports, and I think
Yeah,
especially for like downwind foiling, like Swell City and the hatchery is definitely like one of those spots that people just like, it's on the bucket list basically.
yeah.
Mexico, like is Baja, is that as good? Is it not as good? Or like, from like when you're learning, what did you find the differences were?
I think one of the big benefits to, the hatchery and the gorge is, we have these super steep, short swells that get, quite, when you're stand-up foiling, you're kind of looking for that little like pitch into a bigger swell. And because we have the current and the wind going opposite directions in the gorge, you get these swells that are quite steep, which is what you need to like start to get some speed to then come up on foil. So it's a fantastic spot to learn for those reasons. And we have strong winds very consistently in the summer. In Baja, what's cool about this point that I'm talking about is because the water like kind of wraps around and accelerates around this point a little bit, you get a bit of that current friction there as well, which helps with your pop-ups. So the cool thing there as well is because you're in it's a bigger sea, the bumps get more spread out. So you get these big glides that are really fun to get into. Wind speed wise, it's significantly less. Like, it's kind of a funny spot because if we have a day with 18 knots, it's a really good day, but it feels like a day that here in Hood River, you'd maybe have like 25 knots. It's just the pressure of the wind, combined with the swell, it changes. Every spot is a bit different and unique like that. So you might look at a forecast and be like, oh, well, it's only forecast to be 12 to 14 knots, but I still know that that's going to be a good day on the water. Whereas like here, if you looked at 12 to 14 knots, you'd be kind of like, well, in most places around the world, 12 to 14 knots is fantastic. So I think it's a very much a different approach. I would most likely use a slightly bigger foil in Baja conditions than I probably would use here in the gorge, just because I can know that I can get that initial speed up and going, and, not significantly bigger, but like say instead of using a 680 or, a 770, maybe use 860 in Baja. So, you also are a little bit further out to sea from land. So from a safety element, that's something to consider too, because here in the gorge, one of the big advantages is that you're never, too far away from land, which is a nice reassuring thing, especially when you're learning. So yeah, just a few differences, but I mean, both are beautiful. One of the best parts, I would say, is that, the predominant season in Mexico in Los Barriles is in the wintertime, whereas here in the gorge, the wintertime is quite chilly and breeze is very inconsistent. So, and for me, Los Barriles is home as much as here because I actually went to school in Mexico from preschool through until I started high school. So for me, it's home.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know that about you. So that's cool. So you Spanish too?
It's pretty good. Yeah. When I started school there, nobody spoke English. So it was there was a simple answer to that, was that I just needed to learn how to speak Spanish. And what's been really cool is like, growing up in two different cultures, you learn to you learn about how people view the world differently, and you learn that difference is normal. And I think it's a really good lesson to learn as a young kid going forward. And the coolest thing is, it's a very small community, very small town. And our class was the same class from preschool all the way through until everybody graduated. And like, I have my best friend, Angie, we met each other in preschool. And this year it's crazy. We will have been celebrating our birthdays together for 25 years, which is ridiculous, but it's so fun. At this point in time in my life, to have friendships that have lasted that long. And now, working with Wild Wind and Water, the organization that I started here in Hood River, we do a lot with Hood River migrant education. Hood River is 40% Hispanic. And so we're doing a lot of like water sports and water safety education with the migrant education program of the school district. And so my days are, 50-50 English and Spanish, if not 60-40 Spanish to English. So it's really fun to be able to bring, my experience living in Mexico here and combining it so I can speak Spanish more consistently throughout the year and have fun. I love the Mexican culture. It's super unique, and it's very family based, and I work super closely with my parents, both for the organization and then also just we have a really good friendship. So I think that is you learn a lot when you live in different cultures.
Definitely. That's awesome. Good insight. I want to get back into downwind foiling as much as
yes.
I want to sort of fast forward, and I know pretty much until this year you'd been doing lots of SUP racing still, and you'd sort of done a bit of wing foil racing as well. So maybe just quickly tell us, how that transition went, basically from SUP racing, including wing foil racing, to then after I bugged you enough to come do on the downwind, downwind.
Yes. So my biggest focus has been competing in stand-up paddle racing for the last 10 years. When wing foiling came about, I actually was like, okay, this is cool. I want to go ahead and try this. And it was, right before kind of wing foiling came out, the Olympics made a decision to go and change the Olympic equipment for windsurfing. And all of a sudden it was called IQ foil, which is, it changed to windsurf foiling. And I was like, well, okay, this is something that I'm interested in. I like and I really enjoyed windsurf racing. It's been a while. Maybe I could give this a go. And so I started training windsurf racing, thinking potentially of starting an Olympic campaign. At the same time, wing foiling was coming about. And so I was like, okay, this is very cool. Like, I want to, get into some more wing foiling. And then COVID happened. So kind of, put all the sports world on a block, made it through COVID, got back into stand-up paddling. Had a fantastic year in 2021. It's when I won the last 2 world titles at ICF in Hungary. And then did my first wing foil World Cups, the GWA, and surprisingly ended up winning both the surf and the races in Morocco. That was a pretty cool start to wing foiling. I was like, okay, well, this is kind of fun. Like, I'll, give this a go. I actually won the nationals for IQ foil in 2021 in the US as well. And so going into 2022, I was like, how do I do all this stuff? I want to, stand up paddle race. I had just won the world titles. I want to keep stand up paddle racing. I'd like to win another world title, but wing foiling's coming up. I'd really like to wing foil. And also I have this potential, to start an Olympic campaign for windsurf, but how am I going to do all of this stuff? But my answer happened very quickly, because at the first GWA event of the year in 2022, which was April, I was wing foil racing and I had a pretty big crash. And I didn't know it at the time, but I had torn my shoulder. And so I tore my labrum, basically kind of out. I tore about 3/4 of my labrum out. So I ended up having to have surgery, which was 1.5 years, of proper recovery time. So in 2023, I got back into competition in stand-up paddling. That was like my first mark back, was a race in Alicante. And I didn't do very well in the distance race. My shoulder was quite sore and inflamed, and it wasn't damaging, but it wasn't the best. But somehow the next day I won the sprints. So I was like, okay, I can still there's some elements that I'm trained for, and there's other elements that I'm not trained for. And so last year I also wanted to do more of wing foil racing. I went to Silva Plana and for the first IWSA, which is the Wing Foil Racing World Cup. Somehow, again, I ended up winning that. So then I was kind of in this state again of like, okay, training for stand-up paddling, training for wing foiling, windsurfing. I had already missed the timeline for that. So that was an easy decision because I didn't have enough time to train for Olympic trials after the surgery. And then looking forward, I was like, okay, well, I have Worlds in Thailand this year. and I was training my best for Worlds in Thailand. But to be totally honest, my shoulder wasn't quite there for stand-up paddling in the way that I would have liked it to be. So I raced in Thailand. I got a 10th and a 7th, which isn't bad. But, you and me, we know how sometimes those ones feel. And so then I needed to reevaluate. I was like, okay, at the end of last year, which direction do I want to go? And I looked around and I was like, I've been racing stand-up paddling for a long time. I absolutely love it. The people that I've met along the way, the places that I've been. But I need to make a little shift. I need to try something new. I need to go different places. I've learned so much, and let's see what else is out there. So that's when I was like, okay, shifting into wing foiling. And along with that, there came, a bit more time to do things like stand-up foiling as well. And, I didn't really think about doing races until this guy, James, kept sending me messages saying, hey, what do you think about this race in Hawaii called Molokai? And, Molokai is coming up in, 4 months. Would you like to do it? And I was like, oh, there's no way I can do that, because that's when we have our busy season in Hood River with all of the kids on the water. I was like, no way. Hey, Fiona, what about Hawaii? 2 weeks before. Hey, Fiona, we just got to Hawaii. Conditions are really good. You should be out here with us. We'd love to see more women on the water. What are you doing? Any chance you can make it? It's like, James, I would have to come like the day before and leave the night of. He goes, any chance you can make it? I was like, okay, let me figure this out. Anyways, made it. Flew in the day before. We did a fantastic weekend of racing, and then flew out that next day.
Yeah. And
so
look,
that
a bit more background. Like, yes, I was poking Fiona, but also there was originally the Hood River event that was going to clash with that.
Yeah.
And that was not on this year. Is it on next year, or is it sort of? It is. Yeah. So it's back on next year. So we got her over when she needed to come over, when he had the window. Hopefully there isn't a clash next year.
I don't think so.
That was like, originally it was like, come on, let's see if we can line it up. Busy. Yeah, we've got a weekend. And then there was the event that clashed. Okay, off the cards. Event was cancelled. Back on the cards. Let's see what we can do. Let me know how I can help to get you over there. And everyone was stoked you're over there. Like there's no two ways about it. Like, women's downwind foiling in particular is like a serious minority, and there's no reason really for that other than like, I don't know, like there's no reason for it to me, and it's like there's a lot of guys doing it, and there's just not a lot of women, and I want to. We need to fix it, and so Fiona doing it was like not only one extra person, but Fiona's got you've got a big following, and if you can inspire 1, 2, 3 more people, then those 3 people inspire another 3 people, and it just snowballs. And that's how it happens, So yeah, it's I love the sport of downwind foiling, and to get you over was huge. So thank you for making the effort.
No, thank you for the encouragement. Sometimes it does take a push to go and do something. And what has been really cool is seeing here locally. I mean, in the beginning of the summer, in June, there were a bunch of girls in the water who were, kind of popping up on foil here and there. And then, just this last week, we all went for a downwind run. Everybody popped up on foil like a minute before I did. And I was just standing there and I was like, this is so cool. At the beginning of the summer, it was kind of like, okay, like, let's go for a run together. And now I'm like, wait, guys, like, hold up, and so I think it is that snowball that it just takes, an initiative to get it going. And I hope that more women, come to more of the races. I hope that the races can be a bit more, financially welcoming. Because I think that's one of the most challenging things about some of the downwind races when you have to have escort boats and whatnot. It gets expensive quickly. But still, it's like there are so many women around the world that are, crushing it on the water. And sometimes, it takes a step to be able to go and like put yourself out there on the start line. But it's so worth it. So I would say, like, if any ladies are listening to this, regardless, like, don't do it for the result, but do it for the experience. And, it's only going to help your foiling coming, back to your home spot. You'll notice huge heaps of improvement just from participating and being in and around a racing environment.
Yeah, exactly. And it inspires other people, and the more people that do it, the more shuttles up and downwind there are. And it's just, that's one aspect, but it's also just like, it's one of those sports that I don't see it in our lifetime getting too crowded downwind foiling. Whereas, surf foiling, wing foiling, there'll be like that pocket of that crowded spot. You're like, yeah, I'm not going there. It's too busy today. Whereas downwind foiling, if it's too busy, just sit down on your board, wait 30 seconds to a minute and get up again. You got your own space. Like it's
exactly.
It's a cool thing. It's tapping into different sort of energy sources and along a different area. So that's why, like, I started this podcast, to sort of encourage people to do it. But I really appreciate you coming over, Fiona, and I guess showing women, showing another, section, because Annie and Gabby are from Hawaii, and like you were the only non-Hawaiian woman doing the Hawaii channel crossings, and it's super expensive, and stoked to have you over there for that, and and great results. So let's get into it. So okay. Now to Molokai, and you literally, I think you got one Molokai run in, and that was,
I got like half a Molokai run. What was cool is I had this last minute trip, and I was sitting at my house. My best friend came over for dinner, and sitting there, and she's like, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I was like, "Well, I'm actually last minute going to Hawaii to go and do these races." And she's like, "Wait, I'll come." And her boyfriend is sitting next to her. And he looks at her and goes, "Well, if you're going, I'm going." And I was like, "Really?" And they were like, "Yeah, why not? You're gonna go do this thing. We'll come. We'll give you whatever support you need." And I was like, "Okay, well, let me call the boat driver to see if there's room on the boat." And I called him, and he's like, "Yeah, no problem. We got tons of room." So I was like, "Okay, cool. We're all gonna go." And we made it an adventure for us. For me, it was super fun to go, and like, my friends were having a blast. They were drinking beers on the boat, and just like total having the time of their lives in Hawaii, and going to Molokai, an island that none of us had been to before. And I think for me, it was just so much fun. I was like, for races, that's the crew that you want, is just people around you who are loving life and living it. And it was different from many of the other races. You're quite serious, you're very focused, you've done a lot of training. We'll talk about that in a moment. And so for me, it was like cool. It's like, okay, last minute decision, we're just going to go and enjoy this for what it is. That's the focus. So when we landed, we flew over Thursday, and we landed like midday, and there was a little bit of breeze, but I remember calling you, and you're like, "Well, it's the lightest it's been in 3 weeks or something like that." And so I was like, let's just go and do a short one anyway. So I went up because I had actually just gotten my board that I was going to use for Molokai the day before. So I had done like a mini downwinder here in Hood River just to see if it worked. And so I wanted to go and do one in Hawaii because the water is so different. And so I just did like a quick, Maliko to Sprex just to see how it would feel. And then, the next day we had Maui to Molokai.
And how did Maui to Molokai go?
Well, it went pretty well. To be honest, I was very pleased with my foiling, and we woke up that morning and everybody was kind of looking around at each other and looking out, and being like, we're kind of missing an ingredient, because it was glassy, like absolutely glassy. And so everybody was like, well, what are you going to do? Maybe take a little bit of a bigger foil. Anyways, fortunately, by the time they started, the foilers, it was about 11 a.m. And, there was some good breeze that was coming through then. But I had never done this. I'd never done, the only races in Hawaii I'd done stand-up paddling where the Maliko runs. I hadn't done any of the channel crossings before, even though I'd been stand-up paddle racing many, many years. So it was really cool to, I love an adventure, and I love not necessarily knowing exactly where you're going, but having to kind of navigate yourself along the way. I think that's a really cool element of racing that we don't always get to tap into, because a lot of times you're doing a course and you know where you're going from start to finish. And so when you start a race and you don't even know where the finish is, or you get to Molokai, and when you do Molokai, you don't even know where the next island is. It's a surreal experience. And so, to be honest, I was totally pleased with my start for Maui to Molokai, because I got up very quickly. I think I was actually like kind of top 10 with the guys, which lasted maybe 30 seconds. And then, of course, they all pumped away. But I was going along and everybody looks very similar. It's hard to tell, who's who. And there aren't a ton of ladies, in the field. So it's hard to distinguish when you're just this small little person, on these big rollers, who's who. And about halfway through the race, I realized, I was like, I think that's Annie. And she was just a little bit in front of me. And then I looked further out and I was like, I think that's Gabby, just a little bit further out. And I was like, okay, cool. This is awesome. Like, we're doing a good job. We're in a good spot. I decided to take the 860, and, I think it was super good for the beginning because I got up on foil really quickly. And then there was a few moments where I was like, okay, I would like to go a little bit faster. And I never felt like I was overpowered, but I was like, okay, I want to go a little bit faster to try and catch up. And so I was using the race in Maui to Molokai to figure out how to accelerate, because I had never really done the stand-up foil race before. So I was like, typically I'm just going cruising and surfing. And I was like, okay, if I get into this position in Molokai to Oahu, I'm going to need to know how to go faster and when to like push it and how to actually push it and accelerate. So it was cool because I got to use that race as like, a test to figure out these little things that didn't even realize I needed to know for the race the day after.
Yeah, it was a quick learning curve for the racing.
Yeah. It sure was.
How did you find the difference between, like, I guess Hood River, the Maui to Molokai, and I guess Molokai to Oahu as well?
Yeah, I think, the conditions are very different. One of the things, like in Hood River, you kind of do this thing where you take off on the swell, and it's very common where you turn almost back upwind, kind of up onto the face of the swell behind. And then you use that face to then give you acceleration down and carry your momentum forward. The swell was so big in Hawaii, and, the faces, sometimes they're steep, but also sometimes they're very long and rolly, that at the beginning I was doing that and I realized I was just losing so much ground. And it was actually faster and more efficient to use that speed from the first swell to then either pump up and over the next one, or at least like stay on the face longer to then connect into, another swell that's coming off your quarter, rather than, using that as like turning, kind of stalling out and then coming back down. So that was a big thing that I learned from Maui to Molokai. And then I was able to apply that into, Molokai to Oahu. And only when it got really light in M2O that then I was kind of like carving back upwind to get a little bit more lift under the foil to then accelerate down into the next trough. So at least, you could keep your momentum going that way. But I'd say for racing, and the biggest thing in Hawaii was like up and over and looking for those chutes that keep just going downwind, because you didn't want to stall. That was the biggest thing. Don't stall.
Yeah, there's that potential to go faster by going forwards.
Yeah.
How did you end up in M2M? Like, so you said you were near Annie and Gabby, and so how was the because there was a bit of a pump into the finish, actually. I found that a harder pump than M2O.
Yeah.
So how did you go?
Yeah. So for M2O, this is it was kind of surreal to be on the start line and be in Molokai. Molokai's beautiful island. Was so impressed by everybody's kindness and just the beauty of the island. It was really cool and a unique way to experience the island. So thanks to everybody who was there for bringing us and welcoming everybody. It was yeah, very special to be there. And I'd seen Maui to Molokai so many times, Molokai to Oahu. And I was actually planning on racing in it. And stand-up paddling used to, it's the world championships. And, it used to be and still is considered kind of like the holy grail of, physical efforts. I mean, you're crossing the Kaiwi Channel, which is the Channel of Bones, going from one island to another. And I had always wanted to do it. And I actually was registered for it in 2015 and was training for it. And that was the first year that I was sponsored by Starboard. And so, I was like, okay, first year, I need to do a good job here. I was 18 years old. Like, everybody's doing this. I'm up for the challenge. I can go and do this. And I was training for it. And I just wasn't feeling in tune with my equipment, my body, just wasn't feeling that great. And so I was thinking about it and I was like, you know what? This is the first year racing professionally. I don't think I need to do it this year. So I actually pulled out of the event about a month and a half before the race. And then 2 weeks later, I got diagnosed with diabetes, with type 1 diabetes. And so it was like, okay, well, obviously that's why I wasn't training well and wasn't feeling well. And now I have to figure out how to manage type 1 diabetes while racing. And I'm just going to, put this one on the shelf for a while. So, I can figure out how to manage diabetes while racing. And then I can come back to it. Because stand-up paddling, you're talking 5 hours. I mean, I know you had the course record at one point, but it's a long, long race. And it's a grueling, demanding race. And so I was like, my body's just not up for it. To manage this with type 1 diabetes as of yet. Anyway, so I said, okay, now all of a sudden foiling came along and I knew that the time was going to be significantly shorter. And I was like, well, this is my chance to go and do this, especially because I hadn't had much training leading up to it. So my biggest thing with racing Molokai this year was making sure I had enough food and I had my system prepped. Even though I didn't have much time to, think through it and plan about it. I was like, okay, I know I'm going to need this amount of food, this amount of carbs, making sure that my watch was connected with my Dexcom CGM so I could see what my blood sugar levels were when I was on the water with just like, a quick flip of the wrist. And just, staying on top of it and being ahead. Anyway, so getting there the morning of, blood sugars, fortunately, were super good on the start. It was really windy. Like, contrary to Maui to Molokai, it was super windy. So we're there. And I had asked the girls, I was like, just curious, what size foils were you on? And they were around like a 750 and then a 710 for Maui to Molokai when I thought it was kind of light. And so I knew that I needed to use a smaller foil for Molokai to Oahu. But I'd used the 770R. I'd used that one once, and it wasn't super windy when I'd used it. So I was like, okay, let's see. And then I remember talking to you the morning of, and you're like, okay, here's this tail wing. Here's the 120. Like, this will be a good thing to add, the 770, because the decision was, do you even go with the 680? Like, that's ridiculous. In my mind, like, when I'm wing foil racing, I'm on a 540. And so to think of like stand-up foil racing to be on a 680 is tiny. Like, that's impossible. And so, but you were considering the 680. So I was like, oh boy. And I mean, I don't know if this computer screen shows it very well, but I'm 5'2" and weigh like 63 kilos. And James weighs a little bit more than I do.
I've been 85 kilos. So yeah.
Right. So I'm like, how could he possibly be on a foil that's smaller than me? But I was like, no, happy medium, going with the 770 and also using the 120 tail wing, which I hadn't used that one before either. So I was like, okay, well, we'll go with this. Get on the boat, and it was super windy, super gusty offshore. And we're just about to leave the boat, and you had to motor out towards the start line because they moved the start line further up into the channel this year, which was great. And all of a sudden my board falls over And the captain and I, we were kind of joking around just beforehand. I was like, oh no, like, is your deck okay on the boat? Because my foil landed like this. And he goes, yeah, it's fine, but your foil's broken. And I'm like, what do you mean? You're joking, right? And he goes, no, I'm not joking. And I picked it up, and the tip of the foil, because it hit straight into the deck of the boat, kind of crunched itself a bit. And now I'm looking at this thing, and I'm looking out at the start line, and I'm like, well, I'm supposed to go foil for 40 miles, and this thing is like not smooth. Like, this is not going to work. I'm going to be, cavitating. And I was trying to use like whatever little sandpaper I could find to try and smooth it down. And I was like, well, okay, we're going with the 680. We're just going to go with it. So I took off the 770, moved my mast a little bit further forward. I was like, I used this board for 2 days now. I've never used this foil. Let's hope I put it in the right spot. And let's hope I can get up on the start line. And so when it came to the start, I was totally shocked, but boom, straight up on the start. It was a little bit shaky at the beginning just because it was so small. And then I locked into a bump and kind of like figured out the first couple wobbles. And I was like, okay, we're good. This is going to be good. We're golden. Let's go. And so I had a good start. Gabby passed me at the start. I saw that Annie was a little bit further up in front. And I was like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. And I just started finding a bit more of my groove and ended up passing Gabby back, which I was like, well, that was unexpected. Okay, like, let's keep going with this. And then I saw Annie, and I realized that I was actually gaining a bit of ground. It's like, whoa, this is cool. Like, she's right there. Let's keep going with this. And so I was probably like 20, 30 minutes into the race, and I was using what I had learned in M2M to then try and accelerate over the swell. And I'd almost just about got side by side with her, and the wind started dropping. And I was like, oh, now it's going to take a little bit more effort to keep this going, especially because I was on such a small foil. And the wind started dropping. And right at the same time, I could feel that my blood sugar was starting to drop too. And so I was like trying to eat and pump and, look for more efficient ways to the swell. And in that moment, I slid back a little bit behind Annie. And so then I was like, okay, get some more food. So I was eating food while foiling. And then once my blood sugar came back up a little bit, I was actually able to put more power into pumping forward, and I was able to close the gap a little bit again. But by the second time, I closed the gap a bit more. Annie had a better line. She was further outside of Oahu, and I was a little bit too close inside. So I think she was able to continue with some bigger bumps for longer, whereas I, was a little bit too far inside. And at one point, blood sugar crashed again, kept trying to go through it, and I tapped down and came off the foil just before Diamond Head. And so then I was like, okay, I actually even sat on my board just for a second. It's like, okay, try and breathe. You can do this. Eat some more food. Ate some more food. And then in my head, I'm like, you have a 680 on. Good luck getting up, because there was not much swell there. And somehow I think it was just pure grit, just muscled it and got up. And I was like, okay, now that you're up, go as far as you can. And I went as far as I could, dropped off the foil again. And I was like, oh, okay. And I got up again. And then I actually dropped off one more time, and then got up a third time, and then was able to pump it in towards the finish and still come in second. So no, for me, it was a huge experience, and just, showing that I could do something that I didn't know that I could. And through all those little mini challenges, it went from some of the best bumps of my life to some of the most, mental mind over matter moments, just to push through those last 4 kilometers.
Yeah. M2O has a way of doing that to all of us, I think, because there's been lots of stories like that. And it's that, am I going to be able to get up again? Is my body going to allow me to keep going? And that's, it's different. different kind of challenge, I guess. It's longer. It's a lot shorter on a foil, even though the distance is further. But I'm so stoked that you did it, and second place was such an awesome job, especially, I guess, look, on a foil, you probably didn't even really want to use, you do you think you would have done better on the 770 in hindsight, or?
I think in hindsight, I certainly, speed wise, it was unbelievable. Like my max speeds were very fast, and I was able to catch up. But I think I think two things. Given the lack of training that I had going into the race, I probably would have been able to hold my threshold a bit longer on the 770, which maybe would have made me a little bit more competitive towards the end. I probably wouldn't have lost as much time coming in towards the end. So that certainly would have been a good advantage. However, if I were to do it again, I think the biggest thing that I would change would be an increase in training, so that I could be prepared to use the 680 and have that strength and be able to push my threshold longer. Both cardio threshold and then, physical as well. Having more muscle strength, and experience. I think so. Yeah, those are the two ways that I would look at it. I think the 770 for this last year probably would have been ideal. But what's cool is now I know I can stand up foil a 680, and that the code foil 680R is unbelievable. Like, to be honest, I looked at it and I was like, yeah, this is going to be a crapshoot. But no, I was so impressed by the feel of the equipment, and just the fact that it worked. And I was able to, have a very comfortable, go on the foil that I'd never used before. I think it's a huge testament to code foils and everything that you've built into it to be able to have a foil that you can just jump on and be like, yep, cool, I feel at home here. Doesn't happen very often. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm using code foils right now, because it just feels so comfortable. And when you go out there, you don't want to be on a struggle bus. You want to just enjoy it for what it is. So it's cool when you find the tools that allow you to do that.
No, thank you. No, Marcus and Ben have done a great job, drawing that one up. And yeah, I think I probably had a similar, I didn't come down, but when that wind died, I was on the 680 as well, and I'm a bit heavier, as we mentioned earlier, than you. And whilst that first half of the race felt awesome, what it allowed me to do, it kind of sounded similar to you, is it allowed me to be racing for that top place. Maybe for me, top 5. For you, it was, the top place. But when I hit that windless spot, that just got a little bit more mellow, two things happened to me, and kind of similar to you, like my back leg started, I wouldn't say it was a cramp, I'd say it's like muscle spasm. And similar to you, I hadn't really, I hadn't trained on the 680. I'd used it probably, if it was windy, I'd use it. But the 770 was what I was going into the race thinking I was going to use, because I'd done a bunch of back-to-back 770, 680. And whilst I was maybe a little bit quicker on the 680, I had to work a lot harder for it. And the whole efficiency trade-off thing was you go the 770 for efficiency, but 680 for speed. It's a long way. I'm going to go for efficiency when I was, coming sort of 10th rather than battling for the podium kind of thing in Paddle Moor and M2M. It was like, okay, I've got to change something. And the 680 was the change that I made to try to keep up. And it was the first time I was battling for the top. And so I'm wondering if you used the 770, whether it would have been an assured, a more, it might have been a closer second place, but
right.
By the sounds of it, I feel like the 680 gave you a shot to win it if you had,
that's true,
if you had sort of trained, whereas the 770 would have you know what I'm saying? It would have allowed, if Annie had a shocker at the end, he might have got her, but not sure it would have been this. I'm trying to almost, in my own head talk, because I would have done better on the 770 as well. I might have got 8 or maybe, or 7th at best, but with the 680 within myself, I feel like I was a shot to come, fifth, maybe fourth if I had a really good finish. Maybe on the podium if I had a really good finish. But the 770, I was kind of, the way I felt, I was maxed out at like a maybe seventh place at best, is what I felt. And I'm trying to,
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way to look at it. And, for me, my style of racing is to not use something you don't know how to use. Like, that is not the way that I approach things. I typically train on something for quite a while, so I can know that I feel comfortable on it. So for me, the whole experience was a big roll of the dice. And then even using the super small foil was like an even bigger step outside of that. But I totally see what you're saying, because the speed that I was getting, I mean, I think in stand-up foiling, from what I experienced, it's really hard to catch up to somebody. And it's really hard to pass somebody. So the fact that I did that in the race shows that, there is a huge potential. And, with a bit more training, like if I could have kept my blood sugar a little bit higher, if whatever the if is, in that moment, that could have made the difference to like actually making a pass, and like rather than just getting even with first, but overtaking the lead. However, racing, you can train off of ifs, but in a race you can't race off of ifs. So you can only race on what is happening right then. But it is good information, and to think back on and to reflect on the experience.
Absolutely. And what equipment were you using? Because you were using, I guess, a little bit of a longer mast than others, I believe, 85.
Yeah, I was using the 85. So I was using the 85 medium fuse and then the 120 tail. And then my board, I was using an 8.2, the Starboard Ace foil by 18. So it was around 101 liters. So I think board wise, it was really important to have a longer board, because my typical board is a 6.9. And so just having that length really helped with getting up on foil. And I think that also helped with using a smaller foil then too. That gave a big advantage. I also typically really enjoy using the smaller fuse, because it's very turny, it's very curvy. But here I wanted that length to, help with a little bit more speed to keep me tracked on, keep me going. The 120 tail is tiny. You gave me that on Molokai on the morning of the start. And said, yep, this is a good thing. You should definitely go with it. And I'm just scratching my head like, okay, I trust you. And I guess I trust myself too to use it. But no, I prefer a longer mast. I think it also comes from windsurfing and from wing foiling, just being a little bit higher up. I know that sometimes that is harder to get the foil up on water, just because you have more material under your board that you need to kind of work through it in your pop-up. But I like, efficiency wise, if I can ride higher, I have more play. I feel like I have more room to accelerate. I have more room to pump. I want that feedback, and especially because the swell is so big in Hawaii, I don't want the chance to catch a rail and fall. Or for me, the biggest thing that I would do if I were to jump on a smaller mast would just be overfoil and just fly out of the swell. So I like a bigger mast. For me, it seems to fit the style of foiling. And on that day, that was the one piece of equipment that I knew that I was very comfortable with. So that was an easy decision.
When we met on Maui, I was like, oh, what are you using? You're like, oh, I'm like, 85 mast. Like I solely use the 75 pretty much for downwind, because even when I go I've got an 80 over here with me over in Portugal, and to wind on it, I'm like, I feel like I'm so high on the mast, and I notice it's harder to paddle up on for sure. Once up, I think in good conditions I can go faster on it, but in lighter conditions, like I definitely feel like because I'm used to riding lower, like right. My brain isn't it just takes a while to to recalibrate, so to speak. So when you rocked up on the Thursday before the race on the Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, you're like 85. I'm like, I'm not going to say anything because
I'm really glad you didn't.
you're not going to recalibrate. You know, you're not going to you're not going to be able to adjust in time. Like you literally had half a Molokai run, which isn't enough, and then an M2M, which you maybe could have sacrificed it, and then, but honestly, you did so well. I was proud of your effort, and that was cool to see. Like, I guess a good race happening with the girls, and like obviously you haven't mentioned it, but Fiona is like the queen of downwind, like at least 14-foot SUP racing. Like she beat a lot of guys in Hood River, like at their peak.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, Fiona's like downwind. I remember, I think it was the first or second year I went there. I'm pretty sure you beat me. Like it was, Hood River's obviously a pretty different, it's like a localized, definitely like there's some, well, the course you were taking was different to what I took, and you were going a lot quicker, it seemed. So like there's definitely lines to be taken, but Fiona knows her way around downwind bumps. So when you had expressed a little bit of interest, I might do some downwind fall racing this year, I'm like, okay, we got to get her coming over to Maui. And you're still planning to do France, the croissant.
I'm hoping so. Hoping so. I think that would be really fun. You know, it's like even just this conversation here, like you've got me excited to go and like, you know, do more of these races because it is the fun element of going to new places and applying skills, trying new things. But stand-up foiling has that combination of, you know, reading the water and also testing your physical and mental ability and combining it all together, which is a very unique situation on the water. So yeah, we can make it happen. I think I should go.
Yeah, I think you should.
Maybe I should start training.
Well, what is it all now? So you got 2 months. That's heaps of time. Better than 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Better than the day before going. So yeah, we'll see. But I think that does sound like a lot of fun, and you know, most of all, just fun to hang out with you and your crew. And no, I really appreciate the encouragement. And you know, like it's funny because I feel like in most places, and especially with the work that I do now, a lot of times I'm the one going and encouraging people to race. And so it was really cool for me to have you being in this situation, being like, no, come on, you got to get out here, you got to come race. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right, I do, you know. And so I just really appreciate you, you know, with your support and encouragement to go and do something, because you know, we all kind of get in our ruts a little bit of like, oh no, it's easy to say no. Yeah. But when you say yes, all of a sudden it opens so many doors. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. There's also the Western Australian races in November. There's like 3 races in a week. The 21st, I think it is, till the 28th. There's the main one's the West Coast Downwinder, which is a 30-kilometre downwind race in Perth. And then there's 2 shorter ones. They call the Sunset Surf Ski Series that are like 10 to 12 kilometres. And it's kind of it's the first half of the run. It's good. It's a good run as long as there's no seaweed. The course is good though. It's trade winds, you know, the doctor blows every afternoon in summer. And but yeah, I'm not going to be able to go to the France event, unfortunately. I'm over here a bit early.
Oh, okay.
But I'm definitely going to have some representation over there, some Aussies for sure. So that'd be good. But
that would be very good.
Yeah. I've got to wrap up, Fiona, but is there anything you want to leave the listeners with?
You know, you can do a lot more things than you think you can. And so go out and try it. And, you know, if you're considering getting into stand-up foiling, I highly recommend it. You know, when you're learning, you know, and what's cool is that anybody can go and try stand-up foiling. I would suggest not to go too small with your equipment too soon. Just because you want to set yourself up for success. And that especially means your board, because a lot of times people take bigger foils, but then they take boards that are really tippy and hard to stand on. So set yourself up for success. And, you know, when you are learning a sport, especially stand-up foiling, it can be very frustrating and also very tiring. So don't be too hard on yourself. And, you know, just to throw in like one bit of safety, I recommend wearing a life jacket. You know, for the races from Molokai to Oahu, I had an escort boat that was right next to me, so I wasn't wearing a life jacket. But for M2M, I had to wear a full-on wearable PFD, and it didn't hinder any of my performance in the slightest. And every time I go out stand-up foiling here or any place, it's easy to end up offshore or away from your finish. So just prepare yourself and wear a life jacket when you go, because you never know if something happens or you're in the water for a while. And even if you are a good swimmer, like stand-up foiling can be tiring. So just set yourself up for success and have some fun with some buddies on the water. That would be the way that I'd end it.
Great advice. Thanks, Fiona. I'm looking forward to sharing this one. And
thank you. I know that was a lot longer probably, but hopefully you can pull it all together.
That was perfect.
Cool.